Do you know the contrasting differences between the US prison system and the prison system in Norway? In Norway, due to its rehabilitation-focused system, it has one of the lowest recidivism rates in the world, with around 20% of prisoners reoffending. The emphasis on personal development, education, and work readiness helps former prisoners reintegrate successfully. Whereas the United States has one of the highest recidivism rates in the world, with around 75% of released prisoners reoffending within 5 years. The punitive nature of the system and the lack of rehabilitative programs contribute to this cycle of reoffending. Knowing this difference will help us understand the current debate on prisons more easily. The current debate on prison centers on whether prisons are effective at preventing crime and reducing reoffending, and what alternatives might be better. Does prison actually work? In today's video, we are diving deep into one of the most pressing questions in criminal justice. Does imprisonment truly deter crime? Does it rehabilitate offenders, and does it improve public safety? Let's explore both sides of this heated debate, along with the evolution of the prison system over time and the broader societal impact of incarceration. Stick around until the end to hear my personal observation on the state of modern prisons. Prisons have evolved significantly over the centuries. Prisons have a long and complex history. Let's take a quick look at how they have evolved. During the Middle Ages, 5th to 15th century, prisons were used primarily for detention and torture rather than rehabilitation. Offenders were often subjected to harsh physical punishment. The Enlightenment period of 18th to 19th century sparked early reform ideas, shifting focus to penal treatment and rehabilitation. In the early 20th century, prisons started to adopt the medical model, viewing offenders as individuals in need of treatment and rehabilitation. And mid to late 20th century, with the rise of mass incarceration, especially in the US, prisons became more about punishment and deterrence rather than rehabilitation. And finally, in this 21st century, today, we face a growing debate on whether prison is actually effective in reducing crime, with calls for reform and alternatives to incarceration. Is prison really working? Or are we just throwing people in cages and expecting them to change? Let's start with the arguments in favor of prison. Supporters of prison systems present several arguments in its favor. First, there is the concept of deterrence, the idea that the threat of imprisonment can discourage individuals from committing crimes. When people fear severe consequences, they may be less likely to break the law. Another key argument is incapacitation. By imprisoning dangerous criminals, society prevents them from causing further harm. The logic here is straightforward. While incarcerated, these individuals cannot commit crimes. Finally, prisons contribute to public safety and social order by keeping repeat offenders and violent criminals away from communities, thus reducing the risk to society. The crux of the argument is that supporters of prison argue that, at the very least, it takes dangerous criminals, preventing them from causing harm. However, critics argue that prison is not as effective as it's made out to be. First, ineffectiveness in deterrence, which only works with rational offenders. Studies show there's minimal evidence to support the idea that harsh prison sentences reduce crime rates. Many offenders act impulsively or are influenced by mental health or substance abuse, overcrowding, and inhumane conditions. This is one of the problems with prisons. With prisons often overcrowded, living conditions deteriorate, leading to violence and mental health problems among inmates. There is also issue of recidivism, the real kicker. Many studies suggest that prison doesn't lower recidivism rates. In fact, it can often make things worse by turning minor offenders into hardened criminals. High economic cost, which is paid through taxpayers' money. Keeping people in prison is expensive. In some regions, the cost of incarceration can be as high as $25,000 per person per year, an enormous drain on public resources. Critics argue that prisons fail to rehabilitate. In fact, they may make things worse, creating a cycle of recidivism. And then there's the issue of overcrowding. So, where does that leave us today? In the 21st century, we face a global debate about the true effectiveness of prisons. On the one hand, incarceration removes dangerous people from the streets and can help deter certain crimes. On the other hand, it has major social, psychological, and financial cost. In countries like the US, the prison population has skyrocketed, leading to questions about whether it's even worth the price we are paying, price that the taxpayers are paying. As the prison population continues to rise, so does the cost, both socially and financially. The US alone spends billions on incarceration, but are we seeing results? Rather than relying solely on prison, alternatives like restorative justice, therapeutic justice, and community-based programs are gaining attention. These approaches focus on healing and rehabilitation, not just punishment. Research shows that the programs offering education, mental health treatment, and vocational training reduce recidivism far more effectively than traditional incarceration. Rather than incarceration, alternatives like restorative justice, therapeutic courts, and community rehabilitation programs are making a difference. After reviewing both sides of the argument, I have come to this conclusion. Prison works for some, but for many, it simply perpetuates a cycle of crime, poverty, and mental health issues. Prison can work for some, but for many, it simply perpetuates a cycle of crime and poverty. Instead of focusing exclusively on punishment, we need to reform the system, placing more emphasis on rehabilitation, reducing overcrowding, and addressing the root causes of crime, like mental health and socio-economic inequality. And it's clear that alternatives such as restorative justice and community rehabilitation programs should play a bigger role in future. What do you think? Does prison really work? Or are we just wasting resources and creating more harm? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more videos on such important social issues. Thanks for watching.
Door.